Tuesday, April 1st. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. As the federal election campaign marches on, today's show, we're focusing on a parent perspective. What do families want to see and hear from politicians? What are they thinking about when it comes to the future of this country and their kids? As Sandy was just mentioning there in the news, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is in St. John's on day 10 of the election campaign. I was listening to a little of him talk earlier about oil and gas, what he called lost developments, what he's been calling daily on the campaign trail the lost Liberal decade. So that's some of what's coming out there. Looking at cbc.ca/news, you've got bunch of different, obviously, political stories, right? Front burner, their episode is the NDP about to get wiped out, talking about recent polls. The big update headline with consumer carbon tax officially dead, affordability back in campaign spotlight. Pocketbook issues always important at the polls. So that's a flavor of where we are right now in the campaign for coverage anyways. And if you do check out on cbc.ca/news, you will see there's a live Canada election spotlight, and it goes through all the stories in kind of like blog form, right? So here it says the latest. Well, for the first time since 2019, Canadian voters are waking up in a country without a federal consumer carbon levy. Mark Carney scrapped the carbon tax in his first act as Prime Minister before the election campaign kicked off, after the Conservatives spent years calling for the tax to be eliminated. And it goes on from there. So that's the kind of like the political bibs and bobs that we're off to on day 10 of this election campaign. Today's show, folks, we're going to open the lines second half of the show. And the question for you, what do you want to hear from politicians in this federal election campaign? What are you thinking about when it comes to what you want for the future for Newfoundland and Labrador, for your community, for the country? I said a parent panel because, when we're talking about politics, I want to talk about families, with folks who've got thoughts on just what they want. So we've got a full house here today, and then those lines will be open in the meantime. If you want to get in touch with us, the text line is open now, 709-327-8206, the signal at cbc.ca for emails. Here with me in studio, we've got, I'll just say parents, and then we'll go into who each of you really is and are. As Luke Quinton chuckles in the background. So we've got Luke Quinton here, Laurabel Mba, Gillian, Pearson, and Pam Pardy. Thanks all for coming in. How y'all doing?
Dandy.
Great.
Good. Thanks for having us.
All right. Right out of the gate, I guess, the first question that I kind of have for you is that big bit, the big reaction bit. What are you thinking? What's the most important issue for each of you? Or do you even have one?
I think fake versus fact.
Fake versus fact, yeah.
Is big for me. Listening, I have a 16-year-old daughter. I have some young grandkids, and when the only bite line they know is carbon carney, that's all they basically know about the election, then you know that's getting attention. So you want to break that down, age appropriate, and just try to get away from someone who's going to have a commercial on television that has, Pierre Poilievre's face and and Donald Trump's face together. And obviously they're trying to draw a comparison.
All right. That's one person. What about the rest of you?
I have a 6-year-old, and usually politics is not something we talk about just because he's 6 and he doesn't understand. Until this weekend, actually, we were visiting a friend, and it wasn't so much about the election, but trying to understand what role government actually plays in their day-to-day lives, and if government is good or bad, and what it means to work for the government and be part of government. So that was something I didn't think I'd be talking about this weekend, but something that my 6-year-old and an 8-year-old and a 13-year-old, like family friends, were talking about, and just trying to navigate what it means and what politics even is.
Gillian.
I have a 6-year-old as well, and a 10-year-old. And again, we don't tend to have really, deep, meaningful political conversations. But like you, Pam, sometimes some references will come up, in the media or even in kids' popular culture on YouTube about, different parodies or representations of, whatever politician. And my 6-year-old was very upset to learn that YouTubers also pay taxes. But, for me, the issue isn't one singular one. And the issue definitely is the dynamic that we are now living in and operating in and having to navigate when an election happens. So that is, misinformation, how to talk to your kids in a way that is age appropriate, that, instills the importance that, trust in institutions is still possible and it's important. And, critical thinking, as critical as they can think, when they're very emotional, little selfish people. And those conversations are, about specific ideals and values are, to me, they're getting overshadowed by some broader themes right now.
Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a 7-year-old who is absolutely clueless about any of this, which is great. But even she is definitely caught wind of some adult conversations that have been happening in our house. You can see her ears sort of perk up, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" So it's bled through. Definitely, there's too much news happening since January, especially that even kids aren't immune now. They're aware that something is going on. So, yeah,
there's a lot of news that's been happening.
What's up with that? Yeah.
So with that, okay, I find since I think maybe the Churchill Falls announcement, even though we had the holidays in between, but since then, and then especially once you had the inauguration of the U.S. President Donald Trump, but there's just been so much news. So then, especially now in a time of in a federal election campaign, how are you all kind of you've got your families, you've got your work, and then you've got this. All the information coming at you, how do you kind of keep track of it, or do you, or what's that like? Because I know we can enter something thinking, well, here's how I feel politically, but policy is important, right? And what political parties are saying is important for the future government and where we end up. Where's all that at with you folks?
It's my day today, so it is very much a lot of what I eat, sleep, and breathe, and kind of figuring out as a person of multiple marginalizing identities, what each party is saying and how whatever policies they're promoting, whoever gets elected, how that then impacts how I get to move through spaces. So I wish I could say when I'm at work, I get to just focus on work. But when I'm at work, I'm focused on this. When I'm outside of work, I'm still focused on this, because then you think about cost of living. You go to the grocery store and it's can I afford these groceries today? Yeah. It's are you just buying the must-haves because you need to have those things, or is it the days where you have to do the toilet paper and the cleaning supplies? And it's am I going to financially recover from this expenditure? But I still have to make this expenditure. So there's no real escape from politics. And I don't know if I can say I wish there was an escape, because I don't know what it means. As someone of my identities, I've never lived in a world where my existence isn't political on some level. So I don't know what it's like when it's not there.
Tell us a bit more about that, because you've been on the show before with consulting, or Laurabel Mba Consulting. We've done. I think the last time you were on, we did. When was the last time? Was it Black History Month?
I think it was. Yeah.
Right.
I think so.
Okay, so tell folks a bit more about just yourself and what all in that.
So for those who are just listening and not watching, I'm a Black queer woman, and I'm a mom, so I exist in multiple intersecting identities as a racialized person, as a woman, as a queer individual. Those aren't always the easiest spaces to exist with policies and legislation, regardless of what province you're in, not just if you're in Newfoundland and Labrador. So those are things that, as you move through spaces, you need to be very aware of what it means and what is available to you, what resources support your existence and what resources don't. And what, even if we're thinking about socioeconomic standing, I am lower middle class and that kind of thing. So I don't make enough to be considered super comfortable in the way I live, but I'm not low enough where I can avail of income support or those kinds of things. So there's a weird little niche of existence.
Yeah, and this can, so when you're looking at policy and you're looking at the political discussion that's out there, these lenses, right? This is kind of helping folks understand what you're looking at.
Yeah, so these are the lenses I look at, what policies, how do they affect women? What are, so with Mark Carney, when he was sworn in and his cabinet, getting rid of the Minister of Women and Gender Equity, that hits on multiple levels. And then even though the statement that came out that we didn't get rid of a minister, we just put it under heritage, even something like heritage makes it sound like it's forgotten and it's old. We are not living in a world where women and gender diverse people are treated equitably. So how can you put it in heritage and say it's just a thing that we've hit a pause, it's all taken care of, and so that we don't have to worry about it so much to have a minister who's definitely focused on the issues concerning those identities.
Luke, what about yourself? So talk a bit about your own personal, your lenses in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think so often about this. We're living in a time when the media landscape has never been so fractured. I mean, in theory, all of these news stories are at your fingertips, but in practice, you actually have to work to find them and to locate sources that you trust. I was thinking recently just about the concentration of media ownership in this country. Who owns Post Media? How many American companies are in charge of news delivery, basically, in this country? And then we've got one candidate who, has vowed for years to take down the CBC. I mean, I definitely think it's been fascinating to watch sort of how people are reconsidering those kinds of proposals, given what's happened in the States where, Donald Trump has been working hard to basically erase any kind of independent media. But, we should be aware here that we are not immune. I mean, people who know me know that I've spent 15 years living in Austin, Texas. And, I watched the trust in media go down year after year. I watched major city newspapers, like my wife's family had a newspaper subscription to the San Antonio Express News for years, for decades. And we just watched, we'd go down there for a weekend and we'd watch the paper sort of like whittle away to, like 16 sheets or something of news. And then finally they just stopped delivery altogether. And he's only an hour away from the city. Mm-hmm. So as those sources of news that were fairly reliable, tapped into like Associated Press and things like that, dried up, I mean, he drifted into watching Fox News on TV. So that's a dark tunnel, and it happens fast. And I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I feel like I've seen the future, and you come back to Canada and you're starting to see, forces pushing that same sort of pattern here, and it's extremely worrisome. I think if we're being honest, government intervention in the marketplace has not been effective yet. There have been attempts made, but I think we're actually living in it's coming up to be some sort of news desert, and it should be really worrying to us all. I'm concerned.
Pam, what about yourself?
Well, I think, I'm 55. My partner is 67. He's going to be 68 pretty soon. So we're thinking of it from that perspective. Age, security, health, welfare. We also have a 16-year-old daughter. So she's talking about, she has one more year of high school. She's talking about going into the medical field. So I can just imagine the next 10 years of our lives. I mean, realistically, I had her when I was 40. So I'm going to be helping with some kind of bills for quite a long time. So I'm going to need some help, whether that comes from taxes or whether that comes from relief at the pumps or at the grocery store or wherever it comes from. And also, my husband and I own businesses. So we don't get a paycheck from anybody. So we're paying our taxes from the income that we make. And if we're not hustling, we're not getting anywhere. Yeah. So my husband on the structural steel side, he's a draftsman, and that's in the oil and gas industry, and particularly or in new construction. Very important for us. I'm on the entertainment side and on the travel side. And as you're looking at travel to the States is going down, there's an impact there. And also the other side of the business on the entertainment side, when the majority of your news or headlines are coming from elbows up on Saturday Night Live, that's the headline, elbows up. That's now become almost a national anthem. And on the other side of it, people are talking about, well, we don't need to worry about Donald Trump after I think it's April 13th or something because The Simpsons says he's not going to make it. So, So
I saw that.
Yeah,
I saw that go by. It was one of the things I was scrolling. I was like, Simpsons reference. I'll look at that later. So thank you for filling me in on the end of it.
So that's what you're getting, at home, and the kids are talking about, Canada's losing its identity. We're not going to be Canadian anymore, because that's the pieces that they're picking out of the air, and that everything is a battle. And, I'm just trying to stay a little bit calm and say, well, you can vote now. Like, you can get out and vote. We voted yesterday. So you can get out and vote now. So it's important to not only do it, but to say it, to have that conversation at the dinner table. Hey, we voted today. Well, who did you vote for? And have the conversations. I find it fascinating and interesting, like tidbits of information about, how St. John's East used to be conservative, and then it was NDP, and then it went to a Liberal, and then it went, so, I find those bits of history in politics very interesting. And so my kids are trapped in those kind of conversations because I think it's important, because voters change, like whether it's, even talking about historical on the Canada side, like the Orange Wave. Well, what was that? Well, if you don't talk about it, and, that was pretty significant happening on the campaign trail.
Yeah,
like
we're
39
talking
days.
back to what can happen when Jack Layton was the head of the NDP, and
Right.
they ended up becoming the official opposition at this point. That was the Ignatieff election, right? Then the Liberals
Right.
were reduced greatly in polls, and yes.
And when you get someone like Thomas Mulcair come on and say, don't vote, like I think this was yesterday, and he came on and said, don't vote NDP. You need to vote.
And former
for
NDP leader,
a
Tom
former
Mulcair,
NDP
right?
leader.
Yeah.
And then you have someone like Mary Shortall who's going for, a former Jack Harris seat. So I think all these things are interesting historical pieces. That's what needs to be in the history, not what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And, talking about women, it's only been 100 years this week, I think, that the women had the right to vote. So that's 100 years isn't, like my partner's 76. So, that's not all that long ago.
Yeah, no, it's 100 years for like white women. I think Indigenous women has been maybe 40 years.
Yeah.
It's not history the way they make it sound like.
No, it is not.
Gillian, what about yourself and your family?
So I am a little bit of a mixed bag. And again, my kids are young enough that we're not having, really detailed conversations about policy specifically. So I have worked in the government sector. I'm currently working in the private sector. My spouse also works in the private sector. He is a tradesperson. And I'm also on a board that advocates for, sustainable energy development here in Newfoundland, Labrador. I've had a history of, community advocacy. So, I would say that I am approaching this from, a parenthood lens, a gender equity lens, as well as, a mom and a woman who's been navigating, personal and professional public life. I have 2 boys, and that I'm raising in the age of social media. And, I've been pretty politically engaged, in the past and currently, but even, I'm finding it very overwhelming and difficult at times to remain connected, because there are so many pressures on modern families, and, political parties really need to speak to that in meaningful ways to the electorate, because there are so many parents out there who are exhausted in the age of, information overload. The world has been through a lot. There's a lot happening globally that we're all so super connected to that, we didn't necessarily have to experience in the past. So, right now I am looking for, messaging and dynamics that speak to people in, fair and balanced ways, respectfully. And I don't know if elections are times that actually happens.
Yeah. Right? Like, great point. Anyone to build on that? Any thoughts on what Gillian's saying there?
Well, I think people has always been, or the person has always been, an important factor when it comes to voting in Newfoundland. And parties aside, I mean, again, talking about history, and these are the things that come up at our table, is the ABC campaign, anyone but conservative. And just having some conversations with folks to see if that's anything new. And I've noticed...
And we're talking back in Danny Williams' time,
Danny
right? Danny
Williams'
Williams
time.
said, and it was against the Harper government, anything but anyone but conservative because of disagreement at the time.
Yeah, I think that was over equalization payments.
So, yeah.
So, that comes up, and I'm wondering if the folks are hearing that at the doors. And I have some friends of mine who are doing some campaigning with some different candidates. And, if you're talking about someone like Tom Osborne, who I think he won 8 consecutive elections, and he was both conservative and turned to a liberal. He crossed the floor and had something like 72% of the vote. So obviously that's a person who has, whether it's the trust of the electorate or his name is out there or he's had a high enough profile. So hopefully that when, people come to the doors, you can kind of gather the kids around and maybe kind of say, hey, this is so-and-so running for so-and-so, or and have a conversation on those levels as well. Mary Shortall is another name that's someone who's been well known and has run a couple of times.
Yeah, you've got a David Brazel running for the
David
Conservatives,
Brazel,
super well known, right?
Super well known, and has a crazy interesting history from being from Belle Island, and I think in an orphanage and all this stuff, and let alone his political advocacy work and work that he has done. So I think that's kind of where I approach it. I kind of make it a little more personal.
Yeah, than Pardy.
Yeah,
right.
Who's running in your area? Who are the 3 people? Go to the campaign office. And I know you're saying a 6-year-old isn't interested, but a 6-year-old isn't always interested in going to get a visit to the dentist or going to get their hair cut either. So I think these are the kind of things that kind of makes it more relatable to them. I saw a picture on social media yesterday talking about rotational workers, and a rotational worker was getting ready to go and he wanted to vote. So I was there as well. And he just told me that he was taking a picture of his 6-year-old daughter in front of a David Brazel sign because he went in and voted, obviously. That was his thinking, and the thumbs up were, there. The little girl with the thumbs up in front of the political truck that was as we were driving by. And I just thought, that's the kind of thing you do. Take the kids with you when you vote. Have the little conversation. Have the conversation about who's in your riding or who's in your district. We're having a provincial election coming up soon as well, so lots of opportunity.
3 elections this year, right? Because it's
municipal.
We're waiting for a provincial one, and then the beginning of October we've got that municipal election. Folks, you're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. You're listening to a parent panel here, and we're talking to parents about families, about what's important to them, what they want to hear from politicians, where they want this country to go. If you want to join this conversation, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. What would you like to hear from politicians on this federal election campaign? Is there anything you're not hearing that you think they should be talking about? You can text us 709-327-8206, the signal at cbc.ca. Here with me in the studio, you were just listening to Pam Pardy there. We've got Gillian Pearson here, Luke Quinton, Laurabel Mba. Folks, when we talk about Canada, right, this is election times, I think it is a time to take stock of the country you're in, where things are going. And Gillian, like you were mentioning earlier, there's so much that's happening, right? Crisis in the Middle East, war in Ukraine. We're talking about Arctic sovereignty all of a sudden. We're on the eve of another tariff or not tariff thing with the United States again. So much happening. But then to kind of, okay, we have all that out there. For Canada, right? For Newfoundland and Labrador, for this country, what do you want to see? What kind of a country do you want to be living in, and what does that look like?
I'm thinking about environmental sustainability. Yeah. If we even just look at global warming and what that looks like, we've had a really nice winter, and I say that as someone who hates the snow, but is also very shocked at how little of it there was this winter, and knows as much as I enjoyed it, that's not necessarily a great thing. And as we look at figuring out if we're transitioning away, or what that transition looks like into green energy, and what that looks like as a country, knowing that we have organizations here within our province that are supporting that more environmental sustainability, that green energy boom or hopeful boom, how does that look like for people who are in the trades where we're talking about rotational workers working on oil rigs? Do we have a plan for how environmental sustainability matches workforce and all of that? I would like to see.
And are you hearing that lately on the campaign trail? Or has it been in the news yet? I know we're only at day 10, but
I think a lot of the news has been elbows up and tariffs, and we don't actually have a plan for. If all of that wasn't going on, yes, it's very important, and that is a thing that we do have to be concerned about. But at the end of the day, we still have to be concerned about the day-ins, day-outs of this country and how we are going to care for the people of this country. Whatever is going to happen down south is going to happen. There's very little we can do to control what he says and what he does, and be prepared to do what we can to mitigate the effects of whatever happens down south. But we still have lives to live and things that need to be done. And I don't think enough of the politicians are talking about what their plans actually look like for supporting Canadians in the day-to-day beyond the tariff situation.
Gillian, you made that when we were preparing for the show, you talked about the fact of like the elbows up, the tariff bit, overshadowing a time when you can have really important conversations about policy. Can you just go into that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I do think that, the tariff discussion and, these trade dynamics with our, former friend, current friend, not sure, to the south,
are we frenemies? Yeah, that's a good question.
Are taking up like a ton of oxygen, and it is making it more difficult for local, regional, national voices to wedge in there on issues that they want to bring front and center, to their local politicians, for example. I think speaking with candidates directly at the door is a great way to humanize, candidates across all parties and have, frank discussions about, whether you can separate personality from policy or leader from a local candidate. These are questions and discussions that need to happen, but they're not happening broadly in public yet. And I know we're still early in the election cycle, but those conversations are important, and creating those conditions where they can happen, which, thank you for doing your part, are super important, especially to kind of get away some of the fatigue and, like Laurabel said, some of that, feeling that you can't really control some external forces. And, I really want to discuss some, pretty credible positions on affordability, on, as I get older, I totally understand why people are like lower taxes because, when you're in the workforce longer and longer.
Hey, you look at that paycheck and you're like, oh, okay, well, there's this that I get paid with. And then there's, and then your thoughts on where the money goes and the value of it, fine, that's there, but it's something you notice, right?
Exactly. But, as a community-minded person, I also appreciate and support that in Canada, we have a baseline expectation that we do take care of each other. But also, governments across many stripes have also been wasting a whole ton of money. So I'm a little bit all over the place in terms of, how I'm feeling. But I do hope that there is more space for people to have the discussions with all the parties about childcare, healthcare, affordability.
Before I get to the other two here in studio on that bigger question, we've got Jim Flood on the line. Hi, Jim. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. We put the call out for folks to get in touch with the show around the federal election and the campaign to talk for parents, folks attached to parent groups, what matters to them. Where's your head at for the campaign and for who you are? And tell us who you are and what you're all about.
Well, I teach a program at a Paradise, and we teach a program called Neurodefense, and it's geared towards the ASD community, so kids with autism, kids with ADHD, any neuro difficulty, being it neuro difficulties and stuff like that. So we're trying to do a program that helps them with their mental health, gives them self-confidence, fitness, that kind of stuff, right? That's who I am. I teach that program.
So then for the parents you're talking to, or for just yourself, as you think about the federal election, what do you want leaders to hear from you, or what do you want them to be talking about for the folks who are kind of attached to you in your orbit and what matters to them?
Well, if I'm talking to the parents and the students, right, there's not a lot of services that are geared towards the neurodiverse population, right? So, and a lot of the services that their kids can get in, the instructors don't know how to work with that population. There's a big frustration with a lack of services that are available to help this population. I'm hearing it from a lot of the school teachers that are involved with our program. We've got psychologists that are involved with the program, as well as the parents and the kids. They would like to have more services in the school sectors. They would like to have more psychologists available, more programming available for their kids that allows inclusivity within the schools. And when you talk about the teachers, they're overstressed. They've got 30, 35 kids in the classroom. Maybe they got 4 or 5 neurotypical kids. They don't have the resources to properly take care of these kids and give them the education that they deserve. And if they put too much time on the neurotypical kids, it takes it away from the neurodiverse kids. It takes it away from the neurotypical. So the teachers are stressed, overworked, and they need solutions as well.
Jim Flood, I appreciate your time on this and for being part of the show. And it's important to have these perspectives out there. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Or Jim Flood there. And when we talk about shows like this, right, with the federal election, so what Jim's mentioned there touches on healthcare, touches on education, and yes, chunks of that are going to be provincial. But then when we look at the economy and the reason why there's overcrowding in schools and the number of schools being built, all of a sudden there's a big chunk of that that's federal, right? All of this is connected together in a time of an election, what you want politicians to hear and the voices that need to be heard. Luke, I'll go to you, though, looking ahead for the country. And, folks, I will say lines are open. If you want to talk about the election and your thoughts on what you want politicians to be talking about or what they're not talking about, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255, just like Jim just did for getting in touch, although he got in touch a few days ago. The text line, 709-327-8206, the signal at cbc.ca for emails. Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear the education piece. It's something that every parent, I think, wonders. How good is the education system at my local school in the province? Are we measuring up? And a lot of time, a lot of setbacks happen, I think, during the pandemic that maybe we haven't gotten back yet.
Yeah.
You hear stories for sure. And I mean, I think if anyone's familiar with the science of reading, it's a sort of a pet issue of a lot of parents these days, which is basically asking, what's the right way to teach reading in school? There was a huge reversal of course in like Ontario, New York City. It's happening here. Is it happening fast enough? Not sure. I'm just a parent. I'm not setting the agenda. So yeah, there are a lot of worries in there. Class sizes, and it's one thing that's striking, I think, here is like you hear one issue float to the surface. Well, I hear a lot about bullying. That's the big story that I hear in education. But that's just one tiny issue. I mean, it's a big issue, but it's one sliver.
So then when you look at community, when you think of education, when you think of everything that is kind of happening locally, and you look at a federal election campaign, what do you kind of want to see for groundwork being laid for the future of where the country's going? It's
so interesting, isn't it? I mean, so many of the powers of the federal government are actually delegated to the provinces.
Yeah.
Right? So many of our issues are local. Education, healthcare. I mean, if there was a federal election about healthcare, I mean, who knows what would happen in this country? I mean, it's absolutely in chaos from coast to coast to coast. So it's
healthcare, that Canadian concept, right?
Yes,
when you talk about it, like it's something that when you're abroad, people talk about and Canadians brag about. Yet provincial responsibility, yet money coming from the federal government for a lot of these things,
and no solution in sight. I'm not even sure people know what the issues are.
Yeah,
so that's
what's really confusing. The overlaps,
yeah.
Everything. When you talk politics and an election in this country, whether it's provincial or federal, there's so much overlap that it is hard to kind of be like, well, actually, this is everything's an issue for these politicians, for these folks who are going to make up our governments.
Totally. And I think one thing that the the election in the States has really kicked up here is a broader question about what it is to be Canadian.
Yeah.
You know, how much do we know about people who live in Saskatchewan or Manitoba here? I don't know anything, and I'm not being, critical.
Unless you've had the chance to go. Like for me, in my younger self life, I got in the military, in the reserves, and that was my experience for folks across Canada. Had I not done that, I would not have seen this country. My experience would have been over to Korea, Japan, a bit of China travel, and back here, and then one time to Alberta with CBC. I mean, that would have been it. But I got to go everywhere because of the reserves.
Totally. How many people have never been to Newfoundland? You see it pop up in tours and stuff all the time. They're like, oh, someday I'd love to go to Newfoundland. It's like, it's a 2.5-hour flight from Toronto. I mean, just, book the ticket.
But we're in a time of, again, we're going to vote, right? But we're looking at, well, what is this country? Who are we? What are we all about? And what does it all mean? And how do we kind of relate or not relate to each other?
Well, and we can't even buy products, across provincial borders. I mean, that is such an interesting issue. Like when you live in the States, I mean, it's absolutely no trouble to get beer from the state over or two states over. But, it's a big issue here.
Pam, what about yourself?
Well, I think one of the things that I'm not hearing enough of is on the mental health side and on addictions. When you talk about fentanyl and you talk about security of the border, you hear a little bit of it, but only on the, again, the Donald Trump side. Like, are we doing enough to support Donald Trump because we're pissing Donald Trump off because we're not keeping fentanyl because Canada is obviously this drug haven, according to him.
Which is obviously
foolish.
Yeah.
So... but as it affects the mental health, which goes to healthcare, which is what Luke was talking about, and getting down, to the federal money into the provinces, and these representatives are representing their ridings, their districts, and they're going to be responsible for making sure that gets taken care of. And safer communities all around is a huge issue, and that goes to mental health. If you're not housing secure, if you're not food secure, if you're struggling in the justice system, all those things are going to affect your mental health. And all of a sudden, the community is not safe. So what are we going to do? You might not have that issue in your family. You might be, living on a beautiful little street in Mount Pearl or Portugal Coast St. Phillips or wherever, but you are going to be impacted if we don't support our neighbors.
Yeah, and this reminds me, we did a show a little while ago about young folks at risk in Newfoundland and Labrador and what challenges there are. And one of the things that came up was having wraparound supports for kids in schools, which goes to Jim Flood's call and what he was talking about in looking at class sizes and what is there for the education system. So all of a sudden, when you're talking housing, security, all of the certain opioid epidemic, some of the federal stuff that is absolutely connected provincially and all the way down to an individual classroom and school and household.
Yeah,
we've got Jeff on the line from St. John's. Hi, how you doing?
Good. I'm listening with interest to your show.
Any thoughts?
Thought I'd chime in.
Yes, please. Go for it.
Okay, there's one issue that was at the forefront 2 election cycles ago that's completely off the radar now, but I feel is very important, and that's proportional representation.
Right.
So Trudeau famously stated during that election that this would be the last first past the post election, and that was one promise that fell through.
Yeah.
But I believe that proportional representation is the next evolution of democracy. So everybody's vote is truly counted. And we know now that we have tremendous voter apathy and that our governing party is really elected on a tiny minority of the population. And this is where I think a lot of the issues are hidden within that whole framework.
Yeah, and the fact, we don't vote directly for the prime minister in this country. There could be someone in your riding who you really like, but perhaps you're not as attuned to the federal policies, and you can't parse out that vote. You can't let those two vote notions go out for your as you vote and to put your point across.
Well, you brought up an interesting idea there. A lot of people do approach voting by voting for a person that they seem to connect with. Personally, I think that is a poor voting strategy. You really must vote for the party, because one person is just a tiny fraction of a complete party, and it's really the party's policies that we really should be voting for.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to put that to the panel here, and I appreciate you putting that out, because yes, it is something that it was a big thing two election cycles ago, and it's still a topic to be discussed. Thank you so much.
Thanks for taking my call.
All right, folks, and if you want to join the conversation, if you've got thoughts on what Jeff said or anything else you're hearing right now, thoughts on the federal election campaign, what you're hearing or not hearing from politicians, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Emails thesignal@cbc.ca. And when I say politicians, folks in our communities, all of our communities running to represent us, right, federally this time, and we'll probably be all back again pretty soon for a provincial one as well. Any thoughts on what Jeff was saying there? Well, because Pam, it touches on some of what you were saying, because you're very much an individual type. Hey, like this person's in a riding, speaks to me or speaks to folks. This is it. What do you think about what Jeff was saying?
I think it's challenging. Not enough people are voting anyway. There's a lot of voter apathy, I think, is the term that people use, and so people aren't going to the polls. And I think if you're looking at it, you have to look at it from the soup to the nuts. I mean, you have to look at it as a whole meal, of course. But it gets really challenging. I mean, if you take a look, Mark Carney just came in as the Prime Minister, and he's running to lead the Liberal Party. So, and the platform that he's talking about, he can't align himself with Justin Trudeau. He has to, one of the first things he did was change the carbon tax. So...
Yeah, a signature Liberal policy, and the
gone.
new Liberal leader, PM, but Liberal leader right now during the campaign, that is gone. And that's why gas is down, 20 cents or something today? Yeah.
Right, and I think people get a carbon tax rebate, I think, this month as well.
One more is coming, yeah.
And that's before the election. So if you think politics aren't personal, and that someone's going to cash that check and they're going to go buy diapers or food or groceries or whatever. If you think politics isn't personal, then you'd be wrong. But the bigger campaign, you're looking at, what's really the difference in Pierre Poilievre and
Jagmeet Singh or Mark Carney or in Quebec, Yves-François Blanchet, whatever. Yeah.
And they're going to say whatever they're going to say in the election. Newfoundlanders, Canadians are not dumb. We've been here, we've been through elections, and we know, the past the post, that Justin Trudeau talked about it, never got in. So, yes, you have to kind of look at the policies, and you might be able to pluck something out of the air and kind of say, yes, this is, okay, well, I'm going red because of this, or I'm going to the NDP because of this, or the Conservatives because of that. But when you take a look at it, I mean, I know what's happening. People are saying, my God, Pierre didn't wear his glasses today. He looks some cute. Or I'm not voting for him because I don't like his glasses. That is happening throughout the country.
What was it I heard the other day? Someone says we hear with our eyes when it comes to political campaigns, right? And some of the posturing and how people look. So, yes.
Yeah, that matters. And so if we honestly think, I mean, I know there's people out there that say, we really have to sit down and analyze the policies. We need to sit down and analyze the playbook page by page. Is not going to happen. We really need to encourage people to get out to vote. And what gets people out to vote? Why do people vote for Canadian Idol? Why are we going to get votes on American Idol for the Newfoundlander, that's going to be there? The young fellow, Carter. We're going to get out and vote for him because it's personal, because he's from here, because we connect. His story, his mother. That's what happens. So if you like David Brazel and David Brazel comes to your door and you work with David Brazel before, or you're from Belle Island, or you dated his sister, or whatever the connection is, that's going to be your motivation to get out to vote, and we need to focus on that.
I mean, it's definitely a point there, right? The personal motivation. Oh, some fine fella there. Oh, she's great, or that person's wicked.
Loves the tie.
Exactly. So, all right. What about the rest of you? What do you think about what Pam's saying, or what Jeff said before Pam?
I think most people don't vote on policy, and I do think the research probably supports that. Still, most people evaluate kind of their general sentiments towards a party, because we are a system where we don't elect a prime minister directly. And, the leader plays a really big role in that. And policy, unfortunately, becomes, a secondary consideration. I know, there are lots of people who can, as they say in politics, hold their nose over a particular party so they can vote for a local candidate, and some people can't do that. So I do think, voting practices and motivations and rationales, they do differ, probably all across Canada. I do think there's merit in changing the voting system, but I think like kind of tying this all together is, for a lot of people, they're operating in a system where it's difficult to make, a really well-rounded decision for one reason or another, whether that's you want to vote for a person, but you can't separate the party, et cetera. So, I mean, maybe, system voting reform is something that can help make policy discussion more accessible and meaningful.
Yeah.
Mine goes even before you get to the ballot. It goes to when the candidates even pick what party they're going to run for. So, you might like a person, but before you decide, if you're going to go through the process, the party vets the candidate to make sure they align with the party's values and policies and things. So I struggle personally. I'm one of those people who doesn't just vote on person. I vote on person and party, because I might like you as an individual. We might get along, great coffee and all of that. But if your core values align with a party whose core values continue to marginalize people who are from my intersecting identities, as much as you might say policy things might work in my favor, when it comes down to the routine and behavioral values of the party, you might say your policy would do this, but who does your policy prioritize at the end of the day? So I would love to say I can vote on just the person, but the person chose a party because their core values, not just the policies they're going to bring to either Parliament or bring to the House of Assemblies, fall a certain way. So I think everyone, you vote how you want to vote, but for me, before I pick my candidate, I need to know, why did you choose the party you chose? What about this party aligned with you? Did you just pick the party because you wanted to win?
Yeah.
And then that's a whole different situation. But if you picked a party because you're on a core, these are the values I hold, these are the values that are near and dear to me, then it doesn't matter if I love having coffee with you or you make a mean steak during our summer barbecue. Your core values kind of differ with my core values because of the party you fall within.
Yeah, they can still make the steak instead of
Yeah,
going
we
to
can still
Ottawa.
make the steak. When people say agree to disagree, I agree to disagree on things like our steak and our toppings, but we can't agree to disagree on rights. And so those are my things.
Lou?
I mean, when I hear the proportional representation come up, I guess I think about evidence-based policy, Are we implementing policies on any level, provincially, federally, in the city, municipalities, that are based on evidence and proof and best practices? So many things fall through the gaps there. Are we funding transportation because in the way that we should be, or just in the way that we think we would like to?
Truthiness, right?
Yeah.
That Stephen Colbert word. Yeah.
I mean, provincially, we're spending $300 million a year on transportation, but in this case, it means roads. Should we be putting more of that into public transportation? Should we have a voucher so you can buy an e-bike? Should we? I mean, if you look at what we probably should be doing, we probably should be prioritizing active transportation so that we could, get past this tiny fraction of our population that actually, is healthy enough to, get to the middle of the road in terms of what people, expect. I mean, something like 18% of Canadians are, considered healthy, I think, the government status.
Yeah.
It's really low. But we keep funding, cars. We keep funding highways. It's probably not in our best interest as a society.
Well, yeah, if you're looking at community design, walkable cities and towns and all of that along, and just switching infrastructure from the way it's been since the 50s because of copying the Americans.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, really what we probably should be doing is taking the evidence and acting more like Europe. But we haven't. We've absorbed a lot of American concepts in the last 50 years or 100 years. And maybe this is a good time to rethink. But I do think evidence across the board needs to be factored in.
I'm going to take one more call quickly, then we'll do a whip around for final thoughts, and then I think we'll be done because we're getting down there. Karen's on the line from Logie Bay. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Adam. Thanks for taking my call. I was listening to your panel there, and one of the people on your panel talked about getting out to vote. So I think the best kept secret is that you can vote anytime at the Elections Canada office in your area. I voted today, and it was really easy.
And what was really easy? And then your vote's in. How do you feel about putting that vote in and looking ahead to what may come for the future of the country?
Well, I feel great because you know what, you got to vote. Like I'm going to be traveling. I'm going to miss the events, polls. I'm going to miss the election. But part of my to-do list before I went was get my vote in.
There you go. All right, Karen, I hate to keep it short, but I'm going to do one last whip around with the panel here. And yes,
No
thank
worries.
you, because that's a great point to make. So thank you so much.
Yeah, find out where it is and go vote.
There you go. If you remember one thing from the show today, listen to Karen there. All right, whip around the thing you're tracking or thinking about for looking ahead for the campaign. What's on your mind going forward? And we've got under a minute each, 40 seconds, Gillian.
There are a lot of things that we want available in Canada, for ourselves, our children, services. We need to make sure that whoever is elected is willing to attract the investment needed to fund those services that our citizens deserve and also not stifle innovation. A lot of these conversations often happen in silos. And they are corralled around, certain positions. I think it's important that we discuss the, what our expectations are for our kids' futures. And I know, I want every generation to be better off than the next generation.
Pam?
I'll go back to fact versus fake. I don't want to see American-style politics. I don't want to see bashing another leader. I just want to see what you're standing up for and be someone that we can be proud of as a country.
Luke?
I mean, are we going to be better off? Are our kids going to be better off than we were? I'm not sure that's entirely clear. I see the cost of living crisis, housing crisis. I see tuition rates rising. I see a pullback from, good paying jobs with pensions. I mean, I think this question is still up in the air. And this is an important election to think about those things.
So are you glass half full or empty on this?
Right down the middle, man.
How do you middle a glass that's half full and empty at the same time?
No, it's half full. I mean, I'm glad to be in Canada. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Laurabel.
I'm thinking about the fact that I'm the one who gets to cast the ballot this time. So I think as I go in there and I'm voting for about those who get to contribute to our country, our province, and our municipalities who won't be able to cast a ballot. So whoever I vote, I make sure it's not just my thoughts and feelings that go into it, but knowing that there will be people who will be impacted who might not be able to have their voices heard. So those are the things I'll be thinking.
All right, and seeing we still have a minute, I asked Luke, but to you, how are you? Are you optimistic, not optimistic, pessimistic, scared?
I am cautiously optimistic because I know a lot of young people are going to vote this time. Because there are a lot of young people who are not yes, my kiddo is 6, but there are a lot of young people who are now engaged in politics because we are in a tech generation and they're watching it on every end. So I'm cautiously optimistic because from the way they move in social spaces, they are caring about the world that they exist in. So,
Pam, same to you.
I'm always optimistic. I don't believe that anybody gets into politics who wants to cause any harm. Okay. I believe anybody who gets involved has a calling and they want to do good, something good. So I'm always optimistic. We're a great country and we can only get better.
Gillian.
I'm also cautiously optimistic, albeit not original, apparently. I also do think that a lot of people get into politics for, good reasons. And I also think sometimes the system and people around them make it more difficult or easier for them to be complacent. And that is not an indictment of any particular party or level of government. But I think these conversations are important to kind of suss out how people feel about the future. And I hope it's a brighter one.
All right. Thank you all for this discussion, and for the rest of you, for all of you listening out there, if you've got thoughts on today's show or any other show, the signal at cbc.ca. The signal line, 709-576-5260. Tomorrow, it's been 5 years since COVID and the pandemic upended the world, but the healthcare system was struggling pre-COVID. Our guests tomorrow are on the front lines of healthcare. They will share their thoughts on issues with our system, some fixes they think are failing, and which ones they think should be brought in. But that's tomorrow on The Signal. Thanks for listening.